Hello, this is Stuart Nachbar with Educated Quest. With me is Bobby Andrews. He is the Senior Director for Enrollment Initiatives at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute, Indiana. Counselors asked me to learn more about Rose-Hulman because it is unique in terms of being a very undergraduate focused engineering school, but it's not an ultra small one like Olin in Massachusetts or Cooper Union in New York City. In fact, it has a history that's about as long as schools that people out my way consider like Lehigh and Stevens and Rensselaer. It has that kind of history to it, but it's evolved very differently. And I asked Bobby if he could share some insights into the school for us today. Bobby, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks very much, Stuart. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk a little more about Rose-Hulman and what makes us, I think, unique or a valuable addition for your students as you're thinking about schools. So I think I'll touch right on the kind of the evolution of Rose-Hulman from its time as similar. We were talking off camera before we started about Lehigh and its origination coming from an industry need specifically. We were Rose Polytechnic Institute, founded specifically by Chauncey Rose to help build the next generation of civil engineers for the railroad as it continued westward. We're right on the Illinois border, and we were the forefront of the railroad's expansion into the western U.S. So we certainly grew from that, and that our original civil engineering program was a small group of young men at the time that were going through. We were a male-only school until 1995, when we became co-ed. But we still host about 19 undergraduate majors. There's 15 minors in the humanities here at the Institute where students get that exposure. It has the look and feel of a traditional liberal arts college you would see on the East Coast. As a native New Yorker and having attended college in Connecticut, feels very much every day like that I'm going onto campus in any number of those places. So you get the intimate feel, but with a little over 2,000 students on campus. Our focus is entirely on undergraduate. We do have 10 graduate programs on campus. There's masters only, but that comprises only about 100 students, many of which are returning from industry or doing it as part of their work in industry. We do have a lot of opportunities for students who come in with AP credits and have a pretty substantial credit load to be able to add that master's degree on as well as part of that 4-year experience. And it's actually a program called R-Square. So really getting 2 Rose-Hulman degrees during that time. But the reality and the ethos of this institution are making sure that our students have research one large state university type experiences and exposure, but doing an undergraduate experience. So, it's our main science building here, our main engineering building here on campus is the Center for Industry Development. So our students graduate from here with the same level of lab experience and practical experience as a PhD student does from an IU, or I should say Purdue, which is our closest competitor. And obviously, I think one-year students would know. But the reality is our students are doing internships. It's about 30% of, or 22% last year of freshmen were doing internships by the time they got to the 4th quarter of their first year. Career development works really, really well in facilitating those relationships for our students because, it's an investment in time and energy to get to Terre Haute. We're only about 35% of our students come from Illinois, Indiana. The rest come from around the country and around the globe. So we know coming to Terre Haute is certainly not high on many people's lists of places to come visit. It's a wonderful place. If you're a Larry Bird fan, it's where he got his start after he left IU, which most people don't realize that he wasn't good enough to play at Indiana University and came to us here in Terre Haute, where his brother did as well. I say that because our vice president here in the office actually went to school with Larry Bird at Indiana State, so he knows that relationship real well. But our focus has always been, and when a lot of places started to grow and expand into the graduate level and master's PhD programs, with that comes a divided eye. Our focus has always been on getting students into industry, of which about 85% of our graduates go off into the industry right away when they leave here. 15% are going into graduate school, mostly PhD programs, but there are some master's programs. Any given year of a class of about 550, we usually have about 40 to 50 of those students interested in going into pre-med. We have a great pre-med program, but by the time they go to graduate, it's usually about 10 students that go off to medical school. And that's not because they're not prepared, but it's because after a few years of being an electrical engineer or biomedical engineer or a mechanical engineer or computer science, students tend to get really excited and interested based off of their internships and co-op experience. And while qualified to go to medical school, end up finding another passion or love. So I think it's a positive in that the pre-med program isn't so restrictive that it puts blinders on that experience. But it also works very well. So the students, when they graduate from here, it's a very easy, direct connect. We have a lot of students do the early program into IU Health, which is a phenomenal network of hospitals here, but also the medical school itself, but also go around the country, and in some instances around the globe, depending upon where their native country might be for our international students, and gain acceptance into medical school right out of here as well. So we have a lot going on, but we also, it's an unbridled focus on how do we help your students accelerate their path successfully and not at a rapid pace that they lose sight of what they, new things they could experience and learn, but to make sure when they get out of here in 4 years on time, they have a high paying job in an industry and company they want to work in, not just a job or not just the industry they want to be in. The focus has always been on the family's return on their investment in our education. And it's really a refreshing experience for someone with about 20 years in the industry to see such focus on 18 to 22-year-olds being successful in their development and exposure to obviously the STEM area, but also our humanities play a huge role in who we are as a school and our students' experiences as well.
You touched on a lot of things in that answer. So I want to try to, ask a few questions off that lengthy answer. The Hulman part, that's the family that owns the Indy 500, the racetrack where the Indy 500 takes place.
Correct. That was a pet project of theirs initially. So it was originally the Clabber Girl baking powder. I don't have any clue what that was. I wasn't much of a baker growing up, and but that's where they earned their money initially, and they're Terre Haute-based company. You still come in, you see this classic 1950s billboard right near our campus. But they are the Hulman family of Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and we have a couple in our student maker space and design space that's here on campus. It's about 30,000 square foot facility. It's an innovative space for students to test their wares and practice new things. There's the Target Indy car from, I think, a couple of years ago sits in there right now, and students are trying to retrofit that to become biofuel and see if they can get the same horsepower output. And one group of students want to turn it into autonomous driving. I don't think you want a car with 200 plus miles an hour driving autonomously, but our young engineers would really like to let us do that.
I think you'd want to put a lot of safety features around that vehicle.
Yes, absolutely.
More than you would around a car with a driver sitting in it.
And there's across the street from our campus. So when you come onto our campus, it's pretty easy to see. It's a closed campus. You can see the outline, the markings of what is Rose-Hulman proper. But the property across from us is the Hulman family property that was donated to us a few years back. So there's a lot on there. It's got oil rigs on it. It's got a full working farm on it. It's got a big lab, a big barn concrete lab for our civil engineers to go on. They've drained the wetlands and they're rebuilding the wetlands as part of the mechanical and civil engineering programs. There's a lot going on over there. There's also an old resort that at some point will be refashioned for use, and President's Residence actually sits on that property as well.
Living in New Jersey, students often consider schools that are on the East Coast.
Sure.
They obviously consider the state universities, places like Penn State and Rutgers. Sometimes they'll venture to Purdue, but also they look at schools like Lehigh and Stevens Institute of Technology, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, Rensselaer. How would the Rose-Hulman stand out versus those schools? And who would most likely succeed at Rose-Hulman versus those schools?
Sure. So, I think I'd be real careful on my from me to say, that there's a who does better or not. We cross over quite a bit, obviously with those larger state schools that you mentioned, but primarily, especially for students coming from the East Coast, but even here in the Midwest, uh, Stevens is on that list. RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, RPI, Worcester, Olin, Case Western is a big one for us. That's probably our primary one, as well as Georgia Tech and the University of Michigan. And I think we tend to see students that we think would do very well here end up going to those institutions because they find the right fit for them. Here is a place that, given the very nature of Terre Haute, you're going to be intensely focused on what you're doing in the classroom. But our students don't carry that stress or a feeling of burden that I tend to see in a lot of other places. Here, they're genuinely dealing with both the theoretical and practical areas of interest for them. Our quarter system allows them to really dive in early into research for themselves, but also research with their professors, and get out and do internships. So, coming to Terre Haute is certainly would be a bit of a culture change probably for a lot of students coming from around the country. But when they get here, what they find is they're intensely involved on this campus and can't find enough time in the day to do all the things they love doing here. As a small D3 school, we've got a lot of that school spirit and energy going on, and you can never really quite tell which one of your classmates is the budding all-American athlete who's working with you on a project in electrical engineering or chemical engineering because they're just as good as you in the class. And it creates this very close dichotomy amongst our students here that, it's, I wish you could all come to Terre Haute, but that's when students come on our campus, they and their families say, oh, this is the place. I found my tribe is what you often hear, is that I wasn't necessarily comfortable anywhere else. I wasn't even necessarily comfortable in high school with my peers and my friends. But then they come here and they're like, wow, I found these are the people I can be myself around and not feel like I have to do anything else other than just be me. And I can be as random in some instances as it looks to the outside world of being a computer science major, but also doing theater and wanting to, learn how to build a sustainable river ecoculture that we have on our, like, they really allow students to be hyper focused, but also really broad in their interests and not feel like they have to fit in a box or fit into any particular way.
Obviously, though, Rose-Hulman's more expensive for a lot of families than a place like Purdue or Illinois or Georgia Tech or Rutgers would be. Can you walk me through some of the scholarship programs that students might be
Sure.
eligible
So
for?
we especially for a student coming from New Jersey to here, I would venture a pretty safe guess that we're going to be far less expensive than going to a state institution charging an out-of-state tuition. We're obviously, as a private school, flat rate across both in and out of state and international. That sticker shock of $71,000. Boy, we wish we had people paying that. But last year, our average student paid about $18,000 for tuition and then room and board. So we're very competitive with merit-based scholarship, but we also have some need-based aid that goes into our pool and a number of kind of select special scholarships for students, especially from the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, that alumni have set up who came from years past, who then set up awards for students to come from there as well. That cost is not a particularly high factor for our families when it comes out. I mean, obviously it's not inexpensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as it looks on paper. And the school and faculty are intently focused on making sure our students and their families are only asked to pay as much as we need them to pay, and not trying to price gouge from from any group of students or families.
When you're visiting out our way, your admissions reps are visiting out here or visiting out west. Do you involve alumni in helping you to recruit students?
We do. Our alumni have expressed an interest in doing that. So I'm in my first year here at Rose-Hulman, and Tom Baer, who's our vice president, is in his second year now. So we're kind of changing a little bit of that culture, but our alumni have always been really strong proponents of Rose, but they have not been heavily involved in the alumni program or our alumni recruitment process, other than referrals and a lot of recommendations to come to school. So we're building more and more involvement from our alumni in the process at this point. Interesting, we're doing programs starting in January that the first conversation we're going to have is kind of like a live from type concept of from a young alum at their workplace talking about what they're doing, how that relates to their time at Rose-Hulman. And so our first speaker will be in January 13th or 14th. We're finalizing the date. It's actually a young man from New Jersey who graduated a couple of years ago, who works for Tesla now and lives out in California. But he's someone who has been a real fervent proponent for Rose on social media. Hasn't been formally involved with us, but now we're bringing him formally into that fold. I should say that is not an endorsement from Tesla. He just happens to work there. That's what we're doing. I'm not. I don't want to get into a legal tiff with Elon Musk at this point.
But the corporations from outside the Midwest do come to campus?
Yeah, on any given year, we'll have somewhere between. We have a fair in the fall and a fair in the spring, and they usually are about 330 to 360 employers come to campus. It's a big deal. The whole place shuts down, and they are coming from all across the country. I think the focus, while not as narrow as some of the schools you had mentioned, with 19 majors, our employers are coming from California, from Texas, from New York. They're coming from everywhere and saying, we want 100 mechanical engineers. Oh, tough. We have 150, so you better compete for these kids. And what it does is it brings, we're very fortunate to be in that small group of schools that is able to have people come to campus, and they're not just handing out their swag. They're actually here to meet with our students and interview. And on campus, on those days where we have our fair in the fall and spring, most of the classrooms get shut down. We had to turn our offices with a little for social distancing, since we were 100% on campus this fall. We had to give some more space. So my office was used by, I'm not sure, I think it was maybe Kimley Horn or something, a big civil engineering firm, to interview students for paid internships and jobs that were, they were coming here to hire our students, whether they're interns or grads.
Well, they had to de-densify everything, the campus, for a job fair. Were residence halls de-densified for the fall?
No, they were okay. So we turned all the academic, or as much administrative space, into available space for people that needed to conduct interviews. They still use our large field house. That was where the primary function was, but we repurposed everywhere we could to help make it available for students and employers.
But students were able to live in the dorm like they normally would,
Yep.
go to the dining hall?
To some extent, it was normal. We did space, and obviously took over rooms that were, some of the lounges, not all of them. We still kept most of that, but we were very fortunate to have a little more housing than we need, so to speak. So we were able to keep things in a very safe. We had we were 0.44 positive test rate, and students, faculty, and staff were required to test every week. We were really fortunate to make it through. That's a testament to the young people that are here. They didn't want to have to learn online. They didn't want to get their professors or staff members sick. They didn't get their classmates sick. So they followed the rules and did, many of the rules are ones they came up with and said, what do we need to do to make sure we can be here and be able to have our full fall quarter, which was 10 plus weeks for them to come through and do a remarkable job.
When Rose-Hulman was recruiting the current freshman class, and there were plans known for freshmen to be on campus in the fall. Did that help recruiting students?
We weren't entirely sure that we were going to be on campus for the fall
Okay.
at the time of the class. So we maintained and will still maintain the May 1st date, just so the commitment date, so that students in for that planning. So we were able to, once we knew what the class looked like, which is about 540 students, we were able to make a determination that we could offer the classes in person, that we were also going to be able to safely house students on campus. And I think that allowed us to avoid melt, which I think a lot of schools out there saw, because families knew they could plan to be here. They knew they knew the testing, planning, and protocol, like you would expect any engineering institution to be able to come up with a good procedures manual that's now had, I think, 19 versions of it since August. But we call it Rose Ready, and it's publicly available resource that worked very well for us, and I think it put a lot of fears of our families at bay, knowing that we would be in a situation to protect to the best of our ability their
Did,
children.
did your office receive questions from parents and prospective students that would not ordinarily be asked if there was no pandemic?
Yes, but that Rose Ready resource, which is a substantial manual on what we were going to do for coming back to campus and what it would look like weekly, daily, everything, answered a lot of those questions. Our student life office did a great job of it. In the actual enrollment process, I think it was still so new to everybody in March, April, really March and April, that is we were assuring them that we were going to have a plan, that we would have a plan to be available, and fortunately, it didn't prohibit students from enrolling or create a lot of, I think, consternation. At least with us, they seemed to be pretty clear on what we were planning to do and whether they were comfortable or not with it. And again, fortunately, it worked out well.
In a normal year, students deposit after, those who decide to come.
Yeah.
They're now new freshmen. They're going to be incoming freshmen. How does Rose-Hulman take these kids by the hand from after they deposit through the summer, after high school, through the first semester to help them get settled, get used to the academic demands of the institution, think about possible majors if they're not sure about a major?
Sure. So, one of that is peer mentors. I think that having a group of young people who are current students here that really are bought into Rose and the processes that are in place here was one of the key points up front of giving them a student who's currently here who helps hold their hand through this. Some of them, they got to drag them through, but they make sure they get through the initial upfront logistical steps. But also, as you would expect, I think with a place like Rose and the schools we mentioned earlier, having a good process institutionally for how we do things that is clear, easy to follow, and not overly burdensome to a student is, from our registrar's office, from the provost's office, from the department chairs on transcript evaluation and helping them map out what it's going to look like to be a student here. Plus, the quarter system, now I know it's not unique to us, but it's still not as widely held as it could be, allows students to not feel this impending doom of like, oh my goodness, I've only got 8 semesters to make up my mind and try all these different things and not put myself in a bad spot. For us, substantially higher. So the first quarter, it's not the end of the world if you came in as a chemical engineer and want to change your major to civil engineering. So I think some of that pressure, it's less of a high stakes game for students and families to navigate, which allows them to be a little more calm and be able to be a little more practical in the process, because it's not so enormous of a decision. But once they get here on campus, I can't stress enough how important that faculty availability and relationship is. Now, this fall was a little different because of COVID and the social distancing and having to remove some of the areas where It's very typical for our students to hang out kind of in those academic clusters of where they are, whether you're in the civil engineering or the electrical engineering areas of these buildings. Students have a tendency to hang out there, and the professors' offices are right there. So it's not this, oh, I have to go find my professor or schedule a time. It's often I'm sitting there eating my sandwich and my professor walks by and I can talk to them, or I hear them hang up their phone so I can go knock on the door and go chat with them, and vice versa, where professors will be sitting around hearing people talking, hearing their students talk, and we'll just come out and mingle with them and have coffee and talk about what they're thinking of doing, 2 terms on or 2 quarters on from now, or what they're working on, and how it can play together. So that's where our size is really beneficial, and not having those other barriers of, 100 master's level students or 50 PhD students. Our professors are their doors opening right to the public, not through an office area or an atrium. Their offices and their lives are lived in the same places their students' lives are lived. So it brings, I think, that anxiety and stress level and those feelings of professor student down, and turns it into kind of coworker type experience. And for an 18-year-old coming away from home to a pretty intense curriculum, that's really always been, from what I've learned, has been the hallmark of this experience, and I've seen it in person as well. I mean, my office, thankfully, right now it's not busy because everybody's home for winter quarter for the first few weeks. But I have students walk by my office all day, and they can hear me on the phone. I can hear them talking to each other. So kind of the organic structure of this institution is we're all together. We all hang out together. We all live together. We all work together for the most part. So it takes that, I think, creates a much more comfortable system for students to explore majors, change majors, grow in their major or area of interest, and or find new ones, and find friends and colleagues and classmates that it's a little easier process for them here. It happens naturally.
Is it common for students to enter Rose undecided on a particular major, or that they change their mind somewhere along the way?
So it's pretty common that they come in here decided, and I've actually got the numbers right now in front of me that I was looking at this morning. I mean, we're pretty close to about 15% undecided when they come in. Now, that's not to say they won't change that major. But if you're looking at engineering, you're going to be pretty focused on an area of engineering usually when you come in here. It is easier to make a change or a declaration of major in your first year by the time you get to the end of that quarter. Now, keeping in mind that's 4 quarters, so you've got a pretty substantial opportunity to experience your major right away. You're jumping into internships and research in your freshman year, so you're going to have a little more background to make that decision, inform that decision. So it's not as easy, obviously, as you move up into the upper level programs. Since there's such advanced levels of curriculum in various fields of engineering, but it's pretty easy to add minors and carry a minor, double minor, especially given the prevalence of AP credits coming in. It allows a lot more flexibility for students to
The
add on
school
to their major or change.
the school year starts in which month and ends in which month?
It starts in August, just like everybody else. So our move-in day is just like most schools in the country. Mid-August, you're moving on campus. First quarter ends at Thanksgiving, and then starts right away, right after Thanksgiving, with winter quarter, which spans until early March. So it has that break, kind of like Ivy League institutions tend to have at the holiday, but then you come back and continue your classes again. So for us right now, students almost all went home for the beginning of winter quarter. They will move back on January 3rd. Most students will be back for the continuation of winter quarter at January 3rd. And then we'll run March to May for the spring quarter. And then summer quarter is largely carved out for internships, but they tend to bear some academic credit. But they're almost entirely paid internships, which is nice. So we have students, over 60% of our students will do at least 2 internships while they're in school, and those are almost entirely outside of Terre Haute and outside of Indiana in the Midwest. But they're paid, and they range from $19 an hour up for the most part. co-ops in some academic disciplines where you take, you'll probably take 2 quarters off, but you'll take those quarters off and paid a pretty substantial income working for a company. But then winter quarter, or summer quarter, I should say, the fourth quarter, which spans right up until move-in, is typically internship, potentially co-op, or research here on campus. So senior research that our students do is a little different than you might hear of at other places. So our senior research is all employer sponsored, or company sponsored, or foundation sponsored. So some places, and I've worked at places where students do phenomenal senior research, really interesting senior research projects, but they have no bearing or don't help them necessarily get into graduate school, professional school, or into the workplace. So students are pushed here to make something that is of interest to them, but also lines them up directly for graduate into a PhD program to move their professional lives and academic lives forward and be rewarding. Because it's pretty cool, even if you don't go to work for someone, to have, as a student, to be able to comfortably sit down before an employer and say, I did this research and XYZ company was my, official sponsor of it. They may not have provided any resources, they probably did, but they said there's value in what this young person's doing, and so much so that we're putting our name next to it.
What's the difference between doing an internship over the summer and doing co-op over the summer?
It's mostly just the availability of a co-op program during the summer. Employers don't typically have as many co-op opportunities available, given that time of year when they know they're going to have a bumper crop of available interns from colleges and universities around the country. So typically the co-op experience, it may span through a summer, but probably started in a spring quarter as well.
Okay.
And but again, and the whole purpose, for similar with like study abroad, adding into this or layering on, is to make it work for each student. And at our size, we're nimble enough, and why we have zero interest in growing is because we want to be able to continue to offer that flexibility for students that really requires a high level of customization.
So really, for a school that's on a quarter system, you have to think of it like a 12-month school year.
For the most part, yeah. Yep.
Even if you're not going to be physically in a classroom, you might be on an internship, you might be on a co-op, you might do 2 consecutive quarters where you're working.
Yep.
You might be taking a class while you're working, if you can do that. You mentioned Rose-Hulman earlier, that Rose-Hulman was all male until 1995.
Yep.
I've read that the female population is now about a quarter of the student body.
It's right around 30% now. So it grows every year about 3-4%, and we're seeing a similar track this year where we think we're hoping to make another 5% gain. That's been buoyed largely by, I think, especially on the academic side of the house, just a really great job in advance of the student population 25 years ago becoming co-ed. There were already female faculty members, and so as we've grown, like that population, as faculty have retired and we've seen new faculty come in, they've been more they identify more with the student population that we want to be in, like with the numbers. So we're not asking female students to come here and be taught by all male professors. We're not asking students from underrepresented communities to come here and be taught by only white males. So there's I think I don't think it has not been coincidental. It has been intentional that we've seen a really diverse faculty here that I think lays a great groundwork for our students to feel comfortable and most importantly, learn in an environment that is more typical of the world that they're going to graduate and go out into as well, that they may come from too.
How many women's sports are there versus sports played by men?
I believe we're at
considering men play football.
Men play football. We are adding men's lacrosse this year. It hasn't yet made a full, but there's a number of schools in our conference that add it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I believe we're at, depending upon how you break down track and field, indoor track and field, cross country, we're at about, I think, 9 female sports.
Okay, so there's an athletic opportunity for women as well as.
Absolutely, most certainly. Yeah, our women's basketball is very, very, very good, but our women's sports in general are. And track and field, cross country are very big out here, and you don't have to have been, a top flight athlete. You just have to want to do it, and our coaches do a great job, both male and female, of giving both the novice and the true, like, dyed in the wool. My parents have brought me to every travel summer team and travel team I could ever play in any sport and go all over the place. The ultra competitive and the people who, like, I just love baseball and I want to play baseball. So they do a good job of balancing that, giving people the opportunity to experience that, but also, realizing these are professional coaches that also want to win and want to do well, by their students that are committed to being a student athlete in college as well. So there's a really healthy balance there of giving opportunities to participate while also pushing and challenging student athletes across the board.
Is there optimism on campus and within the community that life will become closer to what it was before the pandemic?
There is, based on the success of the fall, but uh, I think the pretty ruthless pragmatism of most of our engineering our students, the culture is very pragmatic. So there's proof that we can do it, right? That's the fall quarter, those 10 weeks. There's proof that we can live a pretty normal existence here with some measures, but we can have it. And so moving into the spring, there's a lot of belief that we're going to be able to do, we're going to have a little bit better life. But with numbers right now, there's no one's running out there saying, oh, it's going to be great and everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows. We're kind of planning for both, where we'll have a fall like it was with our students on campus going through the regular experiences, with some curtailing of the social gathering and the numbers and things to keep people safe. But if as the vaccine is going to take a while to roll out, I think planning for that is not reasonable to assume that that's going to be here for the spring. Our athletic teams, our conference is attempting to play all sports in the spring. So our football season has moved to the spring. It's going to be interesting to see cross country, given the nature of track and field, cross country, and indoor track and field being usually the same athletes running on all of those sports. Baseball and softball and soccer is going to attempt to play their sport. Basketball, we're waiting to kind of see what's going to happen there, but we're trying to do everything we can to give them a normal or somewhat normal experience. And that's buoyed by the fact that our students did so well in the fall with trying to keep themselves and everyone else safe around them. So that's our optimism there.
Since the pandemic affected employment for the students, in terms of having physical contact at a workplace, did the employment statistics fall off in any way, or did they stay about the same? Or
they fell off. I believe it was 3%.
That's not very much.
They worked really hard to get the employment opportunities moved to a virtual or a abbreviated schedule that would allow students, or an augmented schedule, I should say, that allows students to be able to do what they were. There's only a handful of students that last summer saw their internships actually disappear. I know that was not the case in a lot of places. Most of our internships, with the exception of, I want to say 7 or 8 of them, of 1,600 students, were able to continue forward in a virtual fashion.
That's really impressive, because hiring is going to be affected by, well, gee, do I have a space for this person to work? And the fact that your employer said, yeah, we'll find something for you to do.
Yeah, it's what's really fun for me, and I think it's always been, I think, for anybody who works in the admissions office, is when you start to hear of students getting their job offers and accepting offers for jobs. It's pretty crazy, I think, frankly, that our student tour guides, almost all of them, were telling us that they had their second offer or their third offer in September and October. They're not going to graduate for another 8 months, 5 months, or 8 months. at that point and say, I'm choosing between these 2 or 3 jobs that have already been offered. Like in the pandemic, where employers know, this person's not going to be able to join, or where they're needed, and they've been able to accept. And most of our students, our measurement for success rate, a lot of colleges will put out their job placement rates, whatever they want to, however you want to call them, and say they have 99% of their students or 95% of their students accepting a job. But then you look at the asterisks in the fine print, and it says of those that answered. Here, right, it's like, 99% of the 30 students out of 500 that answered. So here, again, I think it speaks to the long history of Rose and the success of the students that have come through here. And we're at 98% of all students, of the 100% when they graduate at graduation, not 6 months out, but right away. So they're either in grad school or working. And like I said, about 85% are going into industry. So it's real jobs in hand.
My last question, I live in a community where there are very ambitious high school freshmen and sophomores. And they're all thinking about college the minute they walk into the first day of high school.
Yep.
And they're planning their high school course loads with that in mind. If your admissions officers were to come to a high school where they meet students like this, and they're thinking, oh yeah, if I do everything perfectly right, including get perfect test scores and things like that, I'll get into famous brand Institute of Technology.
Right.
And they have that mindset. And a Rose-Hulman rep that comes to this school to meet with these high school students. What would that rep tell those kids to do to prepare for college and consider a school?
Right. So, the really unique position that most students that end up coming to Rose-Hulman have is that they all were accepted into brand name Institute of Technology or brand name state university as well, but chose to come to Rose because at some point during their high school career, I would advise them to do what our students our successful students, which are all of them really, tend to do, is push yourself. Obviously, you want to take a strong curriculum. You want to be able to give yourself, the best opportunity available to you. And so the schools that have a 8-10% acceptance rate, you're going to need to check all these certain boxes. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to be able to go into that school in your college experience with a direction that is inside of you, that is a passion. People will call it a passion, your interest, whatever it might be. But you've got to be able to try to find that. And becoming obsessed with, well, I've got to take the most AP courses I possibly can take, or I've got to get the highest IB scores possible. I've got to do this, this, this. You don't actually have to do anything. What you need to do is challenge yourself, become the best young person you can be, and work hard. That it will bear out in your test scores. It'll bear out in your classes and your schedule. Don't shy away from a challenge, but don't take on a challenge because you think that's what an admissions office is going to want to see. Because at some point, you're going to have the unfortunate realization that you're chasing someone else's dream or someone else's rubric for what you're supposed to be. And you need to be able to find what's going to be meaningful for you. I'm not telling you to go to do nothing, take the easy path. I'm saying find the way you can be in the theater production while also getting through Calc BC and taking history and AP human geography, but also helping out in your community and finding out what it's like to see little kids, light up when they learn how to read, or play your sport and what it's like to be triumphant over someone else, or to help your opponent up off the ground after maybe you've beaten them or they've beaten you. Like, you've got to be able to find who you are as a person, and don't be obsessed with what we as admissions people want. Because I'll tell you, on this side of the desk, and having worked at now the #1 undergraduate engineering program in the country, working in top 50 national liberal arts schools, working at top 10 master's regional comprehensive institutions, which I've done in my 20 years. I frankly want to look at the young person across from me and know that's going to be somebody on our campus that's going to do something great here or when they leave, and that they're not going to be this pressure cooker kid that's crushed under the weight of what someone else's belief or in what is good or not good. I know that's not going to win over the day for a lot of your students, but hopefully for some of them. I think there's such great young people out there that don't need to be worried about what some adult is saying is success. At this point, you are 14, 15, 16 years old. Challenge yourself across the board, but don't do it for the sake of someone else. Just do it because you like a challenge. You want to prove you're good. Don't worry about it to who. Just make yourself feel comfortable and fulfilled at the end of the day, and it'll work. Believe me, it'll work out. Whether it's going to Carnegie Mellon, Rose-Hulman, Princeton, Harvard, doesn't matter. You'll get in where you're supposed to get in, and you'll go where you should go. Don't put pressure on constructing the perfect high school career.
Bobby, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate this, and I've learned a lot as well.
If I can help with anything, please feel free to reach out. I'm here, and I'm a resource for all your counselors and students as well.
If counselors or students want to contact you, how should they do that?
You can call or email. If you go on our website, my picture is there with my contact info. If you want to share, you have my info as well. I'm not sure. You feel free to include that. My number in my email signature is my office direct line. It rings through to my cell phone. I'm also the counselor for all of New Jersey, so happy to be a part of whatever I can do to help you guys and help your students.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.